Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The sound of the fountain pen scratching against the heavy parchment was louder than a gunshot in the silent, air-conditioned mausoleum that was their penthouse. There was no hesitation in Dorian Blackwood's hand. The billionaire CEO of Blackwood Industries signed his name with the same lethal, slashing precision he used to execute hostile takeovers or dismantle rival companies. He capped the pen, the sharp click echoing off the marble walls, and slid the divorce papers across the obsidian desk. He didn't look up. He didn't blink. He simply returned to typing on his laptop, dismissing 3 years of marriage as if it were nothing more than a failed quarterly projection. Done, Dorian said, his voice a low baritone stripped of any warmth. The settlement is generous. You'll never have to work again, Julian. You can keep the villa in Tuscany. Julian Vane stared at the signature. The ink glistened, wet and final. For 3 years, Julian had played the role of the perfect trophy spouse. He had retired from the runway at the peak of his modeling career, dimming his own light to fit into the suffocating shadow of the Blackwood empire. He had hosted the galas, smiled at the sharks on the board of directors, and waited in a cold bed for a husband who treated him like an acquisition rather than a partner. He had loved Dorian with a quiet, desperate intensity, hoping that eventually, the Ice King would melt. But looking at that signature, something inside Julian fractured. It wasn't his heart, that had broken months ago. It was his restraint. Generous, Julian repeated, the word tasting like ash. He reached out, his manicured fingers snatching the papers. He didn't check the figures. He didn't ask for clarification. He folded the document and slipped it into his inner coat pocket. Thank you, Dorian. For the efficiency. Dorian paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was not the reaction he had calculated. He had expected tears, begging, perhaps a scene. Julian was emotional. He was an artist, a creature of impulse. Silence was not in his nature. Is that all? Dorian asked, finally lifting his gaze. His eyes were the color of steel, sharp and impenetrable. That's all, Julian said. A smile, dangerous and unfamiliar, tugged at the corner of his lips. It was the smile that had once graced the covers of Vogue and GQ, a weapon of mass seduction that he hadn't wielded in years. I suppose I should pack. The movers will handle it tomorrow, Dorian said, dismissing him. I have a conference call in 10 minutes. Oh, I'm not packing for the move, Julian corrected, turning on his heel. I'm packing for tonight. My friends are in town. And since I'm technically a single man as of, he checked his platinum watch. 2 minutes ago, I have some catching up to do. Dorian frowned, a microscopic crease appearing between his brows. Julian, be reasonable. The press hasn't been notified yet. We need to handle the optics. Optics, Julian laughed, a hollow, beautiful sound. You handle the optics, Dorian. I'm going to handle my life. The heavy mahogany doors slammed shut, leaving Dorian alone in the oppressive silence of his empire. He stared at the closed door, a strange, phantom ache throbbing in his chest. He ignored it. He was Dorian Blackwood. He didn't feel ache. He felt relief. He had cut the distraction loose. He was free to focus. Whatever Julian did tonight was no longer his concern. The bass of the club, siren, thrummed through the floorboards, vibrating up through the soles of Julian's boots and settling deep in his bones. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, sweat, and ozone. Lasers cut through the artificial fog, painting the writhing crowd in flashes of neon violet and electric blue. Julian sat in the center of the VIP booth, a glass of vintage champagne in one hand. He had shed the conservative, tailored suits Dorian preferred. Tonight, he was wearing mesh and silk, a sheer, black shirt that clung to his torso, revealing the lean, sculpted muscle underneath, and leather trousers that left nothing to the imagination. His silver hair, usually slicked back and severe, fell in soft, messy waves around his face. I can't believe you actually did it. Elias, a fellow model and Julian's oldest friend, shouted over the music. He draped an arm around Julian's shoulder, squeezing tight. The Ice King actually let you go? He didn't let me go, Julian corrected, taking a long sip of the champagne. The bubbles burned pleasantly. He evicted me from his life. There's a difference. His loss, Elias scoffed. He gestured to the other side of the booth. Look around, Jules. You've been here 20 minutes and half the industry is already trying to buy you a drink. You're royalty here. It was true. The moment Julian had walked in, heads had turned. The fashion world hadn't forgotten him. He was the muse of Milan, the phantom of Paris. Models he used to mentor, photographers who had worshipped his angles, designers who had wept when he retired. They were all circling, drawn to his gravity. To freedom, a young, breathtakingly handsome man toasted, sliding into the seat next to Julian. It was Luca, the current it boy of the modeling world. 22, reckless and stunning. To freedom, Julian echoed, clinking his glass against Luca's. Luca grinned, bold and predatory. So, does this mean the ring comes off? Julian looked at his left hand. The heavy diamond band still sat there, a shackle of cold fire. He hesitated only for a second before sliding it off. He dropped it into his empty champagne flute with a melodic clink. It's off, Julian said. Luca cheered, pulling out his phone. This calls for a selfie. The return of the king. Julian leaned in. He didn't pull away when Luca wrapped an arm around his waist, pulling him flush against his chest. He didn't flinch when Luca's cheek pressed against his. For the camera, Julian tilted his head back, eyes half-lidded, lips parted in a look of pure, intoxicating ecstasy. He looked wild. He looked untamable. He looked available. Click. Posted, Luca winked. Tagging you. Let the world know you're back on the market. 30 minutes later, across the city, the notification sound shattered the quiet of the penthouse office. Dorian rarely checked social media. He had a PR team for that. But he had set a specific alert years ago, one he had never deactivated. An alert for any high-engagement post tagging Julian Vane. He picked up his phone, intending to dismiss it. Probably a throwback photo from a fan account. The screen lit up. The image seared into his retinas. It was Julian. But not the Julian who poured him coffee in the morning. Not the Julian who wore high-collared shirts and spoke in hushed tones. This was a creature of fire and sin. The sheer shirt. The sweat glistening on his collarbone. The way his head was thrown back, his neck exposed, a vulnerable, erotic display that Dorian had thought was reserved only for him. And then there was the man. The boy, really. Luca. His hand was splayed possessively over Julian's waist. His lips were dangerously close to Julian's ear. The caption read, *, the king returns to his throne. Sorry, boys, the line starts behind me. Single Julian Vane, freedom, *. Single. Dorian stared at the word. It was a factual statement. He had signed the papers. He had initiated this. Logic dictated that Julian was free to do as he pleased. But logic was rapidly failing him. A low, guttural growl vibrated in Dorian's chest, a sound so primal it startled him. His grip on the phone tightened until the reinforced glass screen cracked under the pressure of his thumb. He zoomed in on Luca's hand, touching his husband, touching what belonged to him. The narrative Dorian had constructed, that he was letting Julian go because he was too busy, too important, too cold for love, shattered. In the face of that image, the truth clawed its way up from the dark depths of his soul. He hadn't signed the papers because he didn't care. He had signed them because he was a coward. He had signed them because the board had threatened to use Julian as leverage in the upcoming merger, citing Julian's frivolous past as a liability. Dorian, in his infinite arrogance, had decided the only way to protect Julian was to exile him. He thought he was being noble. He thought he could handle the separation. He was wrong. Seeing another man's hands on Julian didn't just make him angry. It made him homicidal. Dorian stood up, his chair crashing backward onto the floor. He didn't bother grabbing his coat. He stormed out of the office, his stride eating up the distance to the private elevator. Sir, his night assistant stammered as he passed the reception desk. The conference call with Tokyo is starting in. Cancel it. Dorian snarled, not breaking stride. Sir? But the merger. I said cancel it. Dorian roared, the elevator doors sliding open. He stepped inside, his reflection in the mirrored walls looking like a stranger. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown, the steel replaced by a turbulent storm of obsidian rage. Prepare the car. And find out exactly which table Julian is at. Where are you going, sir? I'm going to retrieve my husband. The atmosphere in Siren shifted the moment Dorian walked through the doors. It wasn't just his height, though he towered over most of the clientele. It wasn't just the suit, a bespoke three-piece armor that cost more than the club itself. It was the aura. A suffocating wave of dominance rolled off him, heavy and oppressive, cutting through the music and the haze. The bouncers stepped aside without asking for ID. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, instinctually making way for the predator in their midst. Dorian didn't look left or right. His gaze was locked on the elevated VIP section, tracking the target like a heat-seeking missile. Up in the booth, Julian was laughing. He was 3 glasses of champagne deep, and for the first time in years, the crushing weight on his chest felt lighter. Luca was whispering something scandalous in his ear, and Julian was leaning in to hear it. Then, the hair on the back of Julian's neck stood up. It was a physical sensation, a sudden drop in temperature followed by a spike of adrenaline. He knew that feeling. He had lived with it for 3 years. Julian froze. He slowly turned his head toward the stairs. Dorian was ascending. He moved with a terrifying grace, his eyes locking onto Julian's across the crowded room. There was no coldness in that gaze now. It was an inferno. "Oh, damn," Elias muttered, following Julian's gaze. "Is that the ex?" Luca finished, sitting up straighter. "He looks pissed." Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. Asterisk, why is he here? He signed the papers. He wanted this. Asterisk. Dorian reached the top of the stairs. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of the table. He ignored Elias. He ignored the other models. His eyes flicked to Luca, assessing him for exactly 1 second before dismissing him as a threat, then landed heavily on Julian. "Party's over," Dorian said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the bass like a razor blade. Julian swallowed, fighting the urge to shrink back. He was done shrinking. He stood up, meeting Dorian's gaze. "I didn't invite you. We need to leave," Dorian said, reaching out to grab Julian's wrist. Julian jerked his hand away. "I'm not going anywhere with you. You signed the papers, remember? Generous settlement. Movers tomorrow. I am not your problem anymore. You think a piece of paper changes anything?" Dorian stepped closer, invading Julian's personal space. The scent of him, expensive scotch, sandalwood, and raw, dangerous power, flooded Julian's senses. "You are wearing my ring." "Actually," Julian said, his voice trembling slightly with defiance, "I'm not." He pointed to the empty champagne flute where the diamond ring sat at the bottom, drowned in golden bubbles. Dorian looked at the glass. A muscle in his jaw ticked. He looked back at Julian, and for a terrifying moment, Julian thought Dorian might strike him. Instead, Dorian did something unpredictable. He reached past Julian, grabbed the champagne flute, and hurled it against the wall. The glass shattered. The sound stopped the music. The entire club went silent. "Hey," Lucas stood up, trying to play the hero. "You can't just..." Dorian turned on him. "Sit down," he snarled, the command so laced with authority that Lucas' knees buckled, and he dropped back onto the sofa, wide-eyed. Dorian turned back to Julian. The mask was gone. The composure was gone. "I signed those papers," Dorian hissed, his voice dropping to a rough whisper that only Julian could hear. "Because the board threatened to drag your name through the mud to get to me. I signed them to protect you from my world. I thought I was saving you." Julian blinked, the air leaving his lungs. "What? I thought I could let you go," Dorian continued, stepping closer until their chests were touching. His hands came up, not to grab, but to cup Julian's face, his thumbs brushing over the high cheekbones. His hands were shaking. "I thought I was strong enough to watch you walk away. But then I saw him touching you." Dorian's eyes burned, dark and voracious. "And I realized I would rather burn this entire city to the ground than let another man have what is mine. You never said anything," Julian whispered, his defiance crumbling into confusion. "You treated me like furniture. Because I didn't know how to treat you like a husband," Dorian confessed, the vulnerability jagged and raw. "I have spent my life building walls. You were the only thing that ever made me want to tear them down, and it terrified me. So I pushed you away before you could realize I'm a monster." He leaned in, his forehead resting against Julian's. "But I am a selfish monster, Julian. I saw you looking at him like that, looking free, and I snapped. I can't do it. I can't let you go." Julian stared at him. This was the man he had wanted for 3 years. The passionate, possessive, desperate man hiding beneath the corporate suit. You signed the papers, Julian reminded him, though his voice lacked its earlier bite. I'll buy the law firm and burn the archives, Dorian vowed. I don't care. Come home. Not on your terms, Julian said softly. He placed his hands on Dorian's chest, feeling the frantic thunder of his heart. If I come home, things change. I'm not a trophy, Dorian. I'm not a secret to be kept or a liability to be managed. I model if I want to. I go out if I want to. And you never, ever decide what's best for me without asking me first. Dorian looked at him, seeing the steel in Julian's eyes, steel that matched his own. He didn't see a submissive wife. He saw a partner. An equal. Anything, Dorian breathed. Name your price. My price, Julian said, grabbing Dorian's tie and pulling him down, is you. All of you. Not just the CEO. You have me, Dorian swore. You have always had me. Julian smirked, the ghost of his earlier wildness returning. Then prove it. Kiss me. Right here. In front of everyone. Dorian didn't hesitate. He crashed his lips against Julian's, a searing, possessive kiss that staked a claim deeper than any ring or contract ever could. It was messy, hungry, and desperate. Around them, the club erupted in whispers and camera flashes, but neither of them cared. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Dorian lose his absolute mind over his husband, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who tried to divorce you to protect you? Or is that just toxic manipulation? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,